I do think that transformation continues for the next 5, probably the next 10 years.
Okay.
I mean,
All right.
we didn't grow this infrastructure overnight.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure in the U.S. and in other places was built around certain models that may or may not be as relevant now as they were then, certainly.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, I think that transition continues. I'm excited to be a part of it. And I encourage people who have an interest to not be afraid to try to get into kind of the project development space. Again, you see people in all these different backgrounds. I think investment will continue to be strong. I mean, there will be challenges. Obviously, the solar space, the wind space become quite competitive. The margins are thinner for almost all of us in the business than they were some years back.
Mm-hmm.
Need to be able to adapt to that. But I do believe that the basic fundamentals of what Fontana Energy does will continue to be strong. I'm excited about continuing to be a part of it. And frankly, just really excited to see which directions it ultimately goes.
Awesome. That's good. I love it. Very optimistic but again, very truthful,
Welcome to the InterGenius podcast with Joe Patch IV.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the InterGenius podcast. I'm excited to be here today. And I got a special guest. We have on Perry Fontana. He's the founder and president of Fontana Energy Associates. Perry, thanks for making some time to be with us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, Joe, thanks for having me on. It's been a while since we've chatted. So no, it's my pleasure.
Hey, that's awesome. Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, obviously with COVID, it's the world's changed a bit, but in full disclosure, I know Perry from many years ago. We've teamed on many projects, and it was just a natural fit. Honestly, when I thought about the podcast, I thought about guests. Perry was a natural fit to get on this show. So I'm so excited he could join us so early in our series in the first couple of episodes to be with us today. So let's just jump right in. Perry, tell us what you guys are all about, what you do, and kind of what your influence looks like in the power space.
Oh, absolutely. So I'll start out with a little background. As I look around, there's a lot of energy around the renewable energy space now. A lot of young people coming in. I think I may be the world's oldest still active developer. I've been in this for 40 some odd years. I obviously started in the conventional energy space, started in consulting with an environmental and engineering firm, then was fortunate enough, and I spent 29 years with that firm. I was involved in their global power business, just great group of people, a lot of good mentors. Just throughout my career, just really kind of fell in love with this space. And then in about 2007, was fortunate enough to be part of a solar thermal startup called Ausra, which I was running project development. And by development, I mean kind of the early stages, finding the site, getting the permits, marshaling the interconnection, kind of all those very early stage things. Mm-hmm. Ausra was sold off, and at that point I did something I'd always wanted to do. My father had his own business, and so I started Fontana Energy. Primarily what we do is, my business model is kind of founded on what I learned, that development's a very lumpy process. Sometimes you're just frantic, you can't get the work done, there's just too much of it. Other times you're waiting for other people to get back to you, and that makes it difficult for developers to staff appropriately. No one wants to hire someone, invest in that person, then let them go, and then just repeat that cycle. So Fontana Energy, is a fairly boutique firm, works for a lot of the major developers, and again, that now has focused almost entirely on the renewable space. And we just try to smooth out that curve. So we provide development support kind of across the board on the various aspects of the early stage development. And also, over the years, have built up quite a practice doing diligence primarily for buyers of assets. So a number of the large investment firms, as I mentioned, there's a lot of global money coming into the space. So been fortunate enough to work both domestically and globally on those issues.
You mentioned something earlier, talking about falling in love with it. What was it that made you fall in love with the kind of work that you're doing now?
Well, I think it really comes down to being fortunate enough to have the right kind of mentors and the people around you. I mean, my background's a little interesting. I was interested in the weather, got my degree in meteorology, then got my graduate degree in meteorology and atmospheric physics.
Okay.
Really came into the space doing air quality modeling.
Oh, wow.
Back
Oh,
in
I
the
didn't know
day
that.
when you typed Fortran cards and you put them in, and my daughter's a computer science major. I tell her that now, and she looks at me like she can't believe I'm actually that old. So, but indeed, that is what I did early in my career. Through that, I met a gentleman named Don Miller who worked at the same firm I did, and Don's view was not to just do environmental studies for our clients, but really help them execute their projects. And it was kind of a radical idea, but I was really fascinated by this, and so I really started moving into doing more and more of the big picture things, and ultimately started doing development of, again, back in the 80s and 90s, fossil fuel plants, a lot of natural gas plants as the big natural gas boom occurred. And just really continue to be fascinated with how these large infrastructure projects come to be. I mean, we're very spoiled here in the United States. I come home, my air conditioner's running, I flip on the light, I take it all for granted. But I've been fortunate enough in my career to realize that it's not easy to get that infrastructure in place. And, the simple fact of development is failure rates are very, very high for just a number of reasons. And you have to be able to, I think, accommodate that, both personally and professionally, and be able to learn from that. And that's what really keeps me engaged in the space at this point in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, actually, because you travel to foreign countries, and I guess Africa comes to mind, and the grid is just not stable. I've got a friend who's over there, and he was visiting the U.S., and we were having a conversation at supper one evening, and he talked about how they leave the light switch that is, always in the on position. And I said, it's because you never know when the power is going to be on. And he's like, that's exactly right. You just never know. We spend a lot of time in darkness. And so that really made me come to understand, the luxury that we do have. And it's interesting, the comment you made too reminds me of, the Transbay Cable project that we did here some number of years ago. And looking at the reality of when you hit that light switch on the wall, if the light doesn't come on, I mean, that's a huge problem. I mean, it's not a problem that can be rectified on an industrial scale overnight. I mean, this is, as you know better than anybody, right? All the licensing and permitting, all the front end work, right? The design, and then you got to go through construction. So it could be years before that light actually does turn on. So it's a significant issue, and it's, really the backbone of the country, right? Having a strong grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been fortunate enough to work overseas on a number of projects, and you do see the impact it makes in people's lives. And one of the things I'm very interested in is going on today is, it's kind of a cute term, the transition of the grid, but it's very relevant because we are really transitioning to more renewables, more intermittent resources, more distributed resources. All of those things make grid management, certainly more difficult, makes siting and development of these projects, much more important. You have to have the right project in the right place, and you have to do it with the environment and society in mind. One of the trade-offs I always tell people is, people don't like natural gas plants, perhaps because of the air emissions, but you can put a large natural gas plant on 40 acres. 250 to 300 megawatt solar projects on 6,000 acres.
Yeah.
So there's different trade-offs, and there's trade-offs. It's like everything else in life, Joe. There's trade-offs in everything, and these are the trade-offs that we deal with in the development cycle. And it's an ongoing process to try to do that right, and it's exciting to be part of that and work with people that are really trying to make that project fit societal needs, their needs on the business side, and all the stakeholder needs that go with it. So it's a very complex process.
Yeah. Well, that was a kind of a question I want to get into next was, what kind of stuff are you working on now? You mean, you talked about the transitioning and the complexity of it, and you're absolutely right. There's, the knife cuts both ways, right? There's there's always a trade-off that has to be made. And I think if you're going to be honest, that's always real. But, share what are you guys doing right now? What kind of projects are you working on? What are you up to?
So we're up to stuff that I really find interesting and fascinating. I've been able to combine, as I mentioned, both the kind of diligence work. You look at a project to see if an investor should buy it, and it's detective work. And for whatever strange personality quirk that really appeals to me, to try to really dig into these details that are somewhat mundane at times. But I always enjoy that. And then I've been able to carry on and actually help complete the development on this project. So working on right now a number of fairly large solar projects across the U.S. I've been involved in some projects in the Mideast. And trying to make sure that my client as the investor is, getting the appropriate value for what they're investing in, but then really trying to shape that final stage of that project into the best project we can make it. And that is something that I think is really challenging. And frankly, every project is different. It's easy to say utility scale solar or large scale wind or, large scale storage and kind of put it in one bucket, but indeed, every project has its own different challenges.
It does. It's funny you say that. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I've seen kind of throughout the development of the the power projects, right? Whether it's the natural gas side of life, which it was more heavily years ago, or the renewable stuff today. It's interesting. I've been in meetings like yourself where it's like, so like, what's the template? And it's, so you've done a number of these development projects and site location permitting, you're looking to return on investment, et cetera. And it's kind of like there's this standard formula that applies, but there really isn't, in the sense that every project is unique, right? I mean, the terrain is different, the regulations are different, permitting is going to be a little different, construction is going to be a little different. So I think the uniqueness is real. And I think that's also something that I sense in you, is that challenge. Is that, I've been down this road before, but every single one has got a different feel, flavor, and then the companies that you work with, right? They have different cultures, different ways of approaching, evaluating, mitigating risk, et cetera. So that it seems like the landscape is always changing, despite the fact the PV, I mean, it's been around a while. You've been around it a long time, pretty straightforward in that regard, but it's the elements around it that to me make it real unique, and whether it will be successful or not.
Yeah, and I think what it allows, because of these differences, I mean, one of the things I think my clients value is I have a lot of experience. We've done this a lot. We've got a demonstrated track record of, adding value to projects. But I get to work with a lot of younger developers coming in the space, and there's always interesting ideas they bring up. And it's interesting now at this point in my career, people that I worked with who were brand new to the space, 15 or 20 years ago, are now like, vice presidents of development in various companies. And it's fun to get together, whether I'm working with them or just socially, to kind of discuss how their journey has gone, kind of their views on what the next steps are. Because everyone does have that individual take, and there's a great opportunity, I think, within the industry, and I think it's incumbent on a lot of us in the industry to really try to make sure that there is that sharing of information. Obviously, how clients do things is highly confidential and sensitive, but the ability to network, especially with younger professionals, and try to share some of those lessons and be willing to listen to their feedback. It's not just a one-way street. I think adds a lot to my daily work.
Yeah, it's exciting to hear you say that. I mean, we were actually touching base on that a little bit before we kicked off the show today. But and that's really one of the purposes behind this entire podcast, is to be able to share the genius and the knowledge of those that have been successful in the energy space. Willing to give back a little to help not only the younger generation, but I would even argue peers, because all the experience is different. Someone can see things a little different, even with a significant track record of success. And that may not be something that you've seen and heard. I think we can all agree that we don't know it all. So I think every little bit, even although it incremental, can be very powerful. And one of the things I'm going to go on record and say is I think one of the reasons that people really like working with you, besides your, the volume of experience you have, is you're just a straight shooter. You always man, you're just, what you see is what you get. And you're very raw and very real. And I think that adds a ton of value though. And I think a lot of people sort of miss out on that. I've seen you in action, and your candor and your straightforwardness, it's tactful, but it resonates so well because it's real, and people know and come to see that it's real, and they can evaluate and make decisions based on what you're saying in a very credible and a secure way. So I don't always see that in other people, but that's something that you always bring to the table. People that know you already know this, but I think that that's huge. They always talk about transparency and being real, but I mean, I think it's always been a huge value that some people provide and others don't. So you've got that, you got that down.
That's really kind of you to say that. But I think it's important to realize that, at every stage of these projects, you're dealing with people. Landowners are people, regulators are people. Your investors are people, and they all have, stories. They all have things they're dealing with. It's been interesting working in the South now a lot. Now you're talking to people sitting around their kitchen table. It's the fifth generation, has owned this land.
Wow.
And, is looking at, is this the right thing for me to do, to sign a solar lease? Does it help me, keep other parts of my family farm alive in these challenging times? You really have to keep that in mind. And I think if you are straightforward with people, both in the good and the bad of the deal, you'll get a lot of respect back, and that will make the long-term relationship go much more smoothly.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That's really, really well said. I want to pivot real quick to, you talked about some of the younger guys you worked with back in the day, and now they've risen to some senior ranks and whatnot. What would you say is a really, I think the word important is overused. I would say indispensable skill set you need to be successful in the space, that you're in? I mean, there's probably several skills you need. I think we could all agree on, but if you had to narrow down to one, what's that thing you got to have that really will separate you from the crowd?
Well, I think there's two.
Okay.
Really.
Yeah, good.
And they have less to do with any sort of technical skill than anything else. And as you know, because you've known me for a while, that's much more on the plane I operate on. In development, you see everything from geologists to meteorologists to accountants to MBAs. The space is filled with people that have different backgrounds. But I think the successful people have a passion for what they do is the first thing. And I think they have a vision. I think when I was in the consulting space, as I moved up and I moved into management and things, I think in talking to the people that worked with me in my group was that they appreciated that vision. And it gives people an opportunity to see really where you're going. It's not just, I'm coming to work today and I got to get this memo done. Right. It's where are we going as a team? And you can either agree with that or disagree. If you disagree, you can engage in a dialogue to change it, or you can decide you're going to take another path. But I think without that vision laid out, you really can't develop a more holistic approach to how you're approaching something like energy project development, which again is this massive, ever-changing, kind of strange thing. So I think those are really the two things that I've told people historically, and I've tried to instill in people, is have a passion, get up even on your worst day at work, and at least have some idea that, yes, I want to go do this.
Right.
And know where you're going. Ask yourself that frequently. Where am I going in my personal and professional practice? Where is my organization going? How do I fit into that? How do I make that happen?
Yeah. I appreciate it. That's great advice, really. I've heard the passion thing before. I haven't heard the vision thing, just being honest myself. And that's something I appreciate you sharing that. That's something I'm going to be thinking about tonight as I go home, really clarifying that vision of what we're doing here, not only with the podcast, but the business, et cetera. Where are we going and why, and really having that clarity. So that's great advice. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think it's overlooked. It's one of those kind of cute terms, but I really do think it matters.
Yeah. I mean, just in this, 30-second span we've been talking about it, I mean, just things are going through my mind right now, things I myself need to spend some time thinking about and just getting clear on. It's almost kind of like that GPS in a way, right? Without it, it's going to be hard to reach your destination. But I think it's a good point. And that's kind of a question we're going to get into in a few minutes, but talking about, hard days and tough days. And let's get into it right now, actually. One of the things that I had another question teed up, but we can always work back. But one of the things I like to get into on the show is really get a real kind of a gut check, with everybody that we get to talk to. And, we all make mistakes, right? We all have big losses and we do get big wins. And I think a lot can be taken from that. So kind of getting an insight to you and in your career, let's just take the first one off the bat. What's a big hit or a big shortcoming, failure, loss, or whatever that you've had? And what did you get from that? How has that made you better and stronger today?
Well, there are a number. Like I said, in development, you have to recognize, I think all of us in the industry have to recognize that there is a significant failure rate. This is not something where you're going to have a 90% success rate.
Right.
You're probably not going to have a 50% success rate. You have to be willing to accept that going in. There's just too many factors. I mean, one of the big things we deal with, and it's easy for all us developers to complain about the various utilities and the ISOs and all of these folks who have these wild and crazy requirements and costs and things, but they have a job to keep the grid stable and not let things just fall apart from all these people interconnecting however they want. But there have been several projects I've been involved in. Projects look great. We thought we could interconnect at a reasonable cost. You get a year and a half into it. You've spent $500,000, $1 million on studies and things, and all of a sudden it's going to cost you, $40 million and take 7 years to get interconnected to the grid.
Exactly.
It goes away.
Yep. Seen it.
You have to ask yourself then, okay, could I have seen this?
Mm-hmm.
Could I have asked a better question? But you also have to be comfortable enough with yourself to say stuff happens, right?
Yep.
And you have to be able to get by that. And there are times when it's tough. I mean, there are times when I've just worked on deals months, literally months, and flown all, across the ocean, to go talk to people about these things, and they just don't work out for whatever reason.
Sure.
You need to be able to deal with that, but you need to really try to look inward to your process a little bit and say, well, could that have been better?
Mm.
And that's the constant kind of feedback as developers we have to give ourselves. And I think in the development community, we have to be willing to kind of, again, share within the limits of confidentiality.
Mm.
How did we get around this? What could we have done better? I mean, much like you and I talk, and we both say, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I talked to a lot of developers who I had the pleasure of working with, early in their career, people like Sarah Temple and Teresa Carroll, and I mean, there's just a number of them. But I talk to them now, and they, bring up points that I go, wow, I sure wish I would have done that on this last project of mine, because
Right.
it would have made things easier. And I think that's the type of cooperation in this industry we need. And I'm really excited to say, I think in the renewable industry, especially since it is a little bit younger, it is more dynamic, we are seeing more of that than I have seen, earlier in my career.
Oh, that's good. I mean, that's hope. I like that. Right. I mean, that's, over time that collaboration will yield greater results time and time again. Right. I mean, the more data you work with, the less mistakes you tend to make. So that's, but that's good. I mean, I like where you're coming from. How do you continue, like you said, hone the process and, begin to ask the right questions and, not to doubt yourself, but to have that honest sense of, could I have seen it coming, or was there something that I overlooked? So that continual pursuit of, raising that bar and just getting, better and better as a result of, coming up short at times, which I agree. You got to get comfortable with deals not working out in the development space. I mean, most don't. So.
Yeah, and you need to be, I think we all have an obligation to our customers and our clients to be clear on the limitations and the obstacles. No one wants to get on a conference call with a prospective client and tell them, well, this is going to be really tough. I mean, that's not human nature. You want to help, you want to get hired. I mean, that's part of your business. But I wish I knew who said this first, but I remember being in a meeting with one of our very senior managers, the consulting group, and he said, well, look, there's fast, there's good, and there's cheap. You get 2 out of 3.
I like that.
And
I like that.
I have reflected on that over my career. I said, well, that is really, really accurate, almost 100% of the time. And, if you put that together with a risk profile on a project, you can, I think, professionally and positively communicate to your customers, your clients, what the challenges are, and establish that cooperative environment to try to work towards, overcoming those risks.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I love the quote, and, setting those proper expectations, and not, not, I don't want to say sugarcoating it, but you're right. You want to help people. You want to believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train coming at you. So, that sense of, having those proper expectations are hugely important. And obviously there's a way to do it and a way not to do it. But, I think that's a great reflection that you offer. Let me kind of in the same vein, think about one of the big successes, the big wins that you've had. And, what do you take from that? What was your kind of walk away from?
So, yeah, I mean, one of the projects, and it's my favorite, my kids will tell you this when we drive, if you drive out by Las Vegas, there's a 1,200 megawatt gas-fired power plant out there.
Okay.
And I was privileged to work with a gentleman named Jim Rexroad, who's now at Macquarie, but he was with Duke Energy North America at the time. Right. That project started out much smaller, but Jim was a very visionary guy, and whether just lucky or good, kind of sensed that things in California on power supply were more fragile. And so basically that project got upsized tremendously, kind of in the middle of the project, not what a developer wants to hear from their client. It's, oh, by the way, let's just, let's make it twice the size of it. And there were all these obstacles to overcome, 1,200 megawatts of natural gas in the desert. How do you cool it? What are you, crazy? And that project exists today and, imported a lot of power into the system during some tough times. And, I just look again at, the vision that Jim had and the willingness of that whole organization at the time to really work through those things and agree early on, this is a bit risky, but we're going to take this on as a team. And if we fail, we fail. And if we succeed, this would be great. And the project succeeded.
That's awesome. I mean, I get that sense too here with that, that overcoming these obstacles. You're right. I mean, it's like the script gets changed mid-movie, it's like, wait a second. I mean, I gotta go reevaluate everything. And that's hard. It's all real time and the clock's ticking, right? Especially with the investment money that's out there. I mean, that return, the longer you string it out, the not as attractive as it can get, but having that intuition that this is something that could pay off big in the end. But I also get the sense too that, you mentioned that, power was distributed at times it really needed to be distributed. And, being there for people, for businesses, for hospitals. I mean, it's hard to put a price on stuff like that, right? I mean, that's got to feel good at the end of the day.
And that is, what we do in this business is we try to provide a commodity, a service that's essential for people, and not just to live a nice lifestyle and have a big stereo that you can turn on, but as you mentioned, I mean, it really is a critical aspect of what we do. And working overseas early in my career, as we talked about earlier, you figure out pretty quickly that's not something that's taken for granted in a number of countries.
Sure. Walk us through, talking about, the career you've had. Walk us through what's it like for you, a day in your life? What's it? I know it has its different components, I'm sure, but just, people that, looking to getting into the space and looking to getting into development, either again, looking into it or newly in it, what's a typical day for you like, so they have some sense of, what it's like at your level?
Well, the first thing I do is I have coffee. That's that's the first thing. I gotta have coffee.
Yeah.
But really, what I work on, probably my personal challenge, is organization. I am, to a certain extent, the character in the Pixar movie when someone yells "squirrel," off I go.
I love
And
it.
so for me, it's really, I try to start my day, and I have a number of different tools I use to do this, but to really kind of center myself around, okay, what really needs to get done today? How do I prioritize the various things I'm doing, whether it's reviewing a data room or, issuing some sort of a opinion on permit status, or, getting the submittal out to a regulatory agency. Make sure that I've got my priorities in front of me, and then I'm a big list maker. So,
Okay.
I make my to-do list and just really try to systematically check things off,
Mhm.
and also try to make sure that at the same time I take care of myself. I try to have exercise during the middle of the day, but it really is, for me, my day can kind of be summarized as, it's checking off a series of tasks,
Mhm.
making sure I'm on top of things, making sure I'm reporting to my clients. I have a lot of interaction with my clients throughout the day, which I think is critical.
Okay.
Um, and you have to be able to tackle multiple projects during a day, because you can check one thing off on one project, you have to check something off on another project.
Yeah.
And the ability to make sure that I'm meeting all of my clients' needs when those needs have to be met is really the key challenge in my day.
Yeah. And that, that can make for long days, as you know, right? Looking at, we've all been on conference calls at ungodly hours of the morning because it's overseas, or you have a client that you need something late at night, or you're trying to file something, right? And you're down to the 11th hour of getting the documents in. So I think there's that part of the life that's really real too, that I've seen. You mentioned tools. So I was, one of the questions I had earlier is what tool do you like and lean on the most?
There's a number of project management softwares that are out there. I don't think I endorse one over the other, but there is a lot of stuff that's out on the web now that is either free or, very cost effective
Mm-hmm.
for people. For me, it's, having kind of lists. So, cards or lists that I can tick through. Other people work differently. I think it's very individual, but
Okay.
I encourage people to, look at what's on the web, and to ask, their people they work with, ask their customers what they use. One of the favorite tools I found was one of my clients used it.
Oh,
And I
wow.
looked at it and
Okay.
said, wow, that's really interesting. And it's on the web and it's free.
Okay.
But I think it needs to fit your style. My style works for me, definitely doesn't work for other people. Early in my career, I tried to make, kind of everyone in my group, okay, we're going to do this and make these lists. This
Right.
just didn't work for some people. They had just another
Right.
way of doing it. Took me a while to learn that I was actually interfering with the process rather than helping the process, even though I thought that's what it was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good advice. Everybody's got a bit of a different rhythm, and that's the one that works for you. And, what are the, kind of winding it up here. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? It could be personal or professional. It doesn't matter. Go either way. I like to open this one up across the boards.
No, it gets back to, I was told, and I know this quote's been used a lot, but it's, the person you're talking to is fighting problems you'll never be aware of.
Mm.
And it's really trying to remind myself when I get frustrated, that how come this permit hasn't come out of this agency? How come this landowner can't sign this thing? Is that, their mother may be sick. They may have a child who's going through a rough time. They may just be emotionally overwhelmed with things. You need to be able to step back. You don't need to understand what's going on with them. You just need to understand that something could be, and frankly, in all of our days, there are times like that when something is going on.
Right.
And just being more sensitive to that, I think, one, establishes stronger relationships among your peers and your customers. And I think, frankly, to me, it de-stresses me, because now I'm not as worried about, why isn't this happening?
Yeah.
Well, there's things that are out of my control, And probably the best thing, frankly, I can do is be supportive of that person and try to help however I can without overstepping my bounds, obviously, to be able to get through and to be able to focus on, the things they need to do to help my process go forward.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. I'm glad you shared that. There's always something going on in the background, and oftentimes we're never, we never know nor aware, right? And so, but it does impact the reality with which we operate. So that's great advice. I'm down into the projection stage at this point. So I know we got COVID right now. It's the world's a little nuts, but at the same time, I do think in this space, there's been impact, but there's a lot of projects that are still moving forward, still going, money's strong, investing is strong. So what do you see, over the next, 5 years or whatever? I'm just throwing out 5, but where do you see the market going, the space going? You talk about the transition early. Where does that lead, in your opinion? Some of the stuff you're seeing and hearing.
Well, I think we truly are transforming how we think about providing electricity as a basic service. And, there's a lot of different aspects to that, whether it's more distributed grids or, with energy storage or more, very high voltage, long distance transmission lines. There's a lot of different parts that fit in, different technologies. But I do think that transformation continues for the next 5, probably the next 10 years.
Okay.
All right. We didn't grow this infrastructure overnight.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure in the U.S. and in other places was built around certain models that may or may not be as relevant now as they were then, certainly. So, I think that transition continues. I'm excited to be a part of it. And, I encourage people who have an interest to not be afraid to try to get into kind of the project development space. Again, you see people in all these different backgrounds. I think investment will continue to be strong. There will be challenges. Obviously, the solar space, the wind space become quite competitive. The margins are thinner for, almost all of us in the business than they were some years back. Need to be able to adapt to that. But I do believe that the basic fundamentals of what Fontana Energy does will continue to be strong. I'm excited about continuing to be a part of it. And, frankly, just really excited to see which directions it ultimately goes.
Awesome. That's good. I love it. Very optimistic but again, very truthful. How do people get in touch with you? People watching this want to reach out and, have a chat with you, talk to you about your services. What's the best way to get you?
The best way is just to shoot me an email at perry@fontanaenergy.com.
Okay. Perry@fontanaenergy.com. People can also find you on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
Hit you up there as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you being on, Perry. Man, it's always good talking to you. A pleasure. I think you threw out a ton of valuable, really insightful information. I know it's made an impact on me, and I'm sure it will a lot of others. So appreciate you making the time to be with us today.
My pleasure, Joe. Always good to see you. Hope you and the family stay well, and look forward to talking again soon.
Yeah, me too. If you're looking to be a guest on this show, you can always go to the intergeniuspodcast.com. Go to our website. You can fill out the intake form, and we'll get back with you shortly. So remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question really is this: what's your inner genius?
This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.